I recently caught up with Annabel Brewer, who's a very successful property investor and an inspirational businesswoman that I'm lucky enough to have known for a number of years. And she was telling me why her strategy of HMOs for students in the Midlands is absolutely bulletproof, particularly in the recent climate. So listen in and find out more. I'm Pete Hogg, and this is Where to Invest.
The reality is, in the property world, you've got to be prepared to travel. Just because you live somewhere doesn't necessarily mean that the investment opportunities are there and it makes sense for the strategy that you have implemented. I didn't want to travel too far because obviously I have two small children, 6 and 8 now. And I am a Midlander originally. So London to the Midlands made the most sense. In the Midlands, you get great passive income. It's great for cash flow, but it's also great for capital growth. The strategy that kind of gets you up and running as quickly as possible was HMOs. Much riskier, much more high maintenance. But because I'm inherently impatient, I figured I was just going to hit this as quickly as possible, get to my financial freedom figure as quickly as possible, and then look at other strategies from there. So that's what I did. And the Midlands, as I said, great location. Birmingham to London is an hour and 15 minutes on the train. So it's very much commute about into London, anywhere along there between Birmingham and London. So anywhere along there pretty much works from an HMO perspective, not buy-to-lets, because the price of the property in the Midlands is still too high for the rental that you're getting, and therefore buy-to-let strategy in the Midlands definitely does not work. So it's really important to be really clear with that. If you're looking for buy-to-let strategies, you need to go further north, Stoke-on-Trent upwards. So that's why I picked the Midlands, and the reason why I went for HMOs in the Midlands is because, again, lots of development going on, particularly Birmingham, Coventry, Nuneaton around there. There's some massive, very, very famous, very successful and growing universities. So obviously where you've got a dense population of students, you need lots of HMOs. So, and that's a fact. Within Birmingham, there's 4 universities. In Coventry, there's 2 universities. So HMO is a great strategy there, as well as obviously for blue collar workers. So your professional lets also work extremely well because, again, there's a huge amount of development going on. So lots of warehousing, logistics. So, lots of blue collar workers, professionals are also looking for that kind of accommodation as well. Student accommodation is bulletproof when it comes to obviously the recent times that we've gone through, where you're still guaranteed your rent because they still have paid their contract. The universities didn't shut throughout the pandemic, so you have this guaranteed rent, and the tuition fees have a portion of that goes towards your rental. So we were unaffected by the pandemic for the whole 2 years. So they're under one AST. So you've got five students who are equally responsible. They call it joint and several. So if one person stops paying rent, the other 4 then have to start paying. So essentially they keep each other accountable. They all move in on the same day. They all move out on the same day. So essentially there's no voids. And you have to provide a personal guarantor as well, so to enable the affordability. So, but as I said at the beginning, it's very high maintenance. Students do make a mess. You have to accept that even though you provide beautiful accommodation, I'm very proud of the standard accommodation I provide.
I've seen it; it's exceptional.
You still do get that group of students who make a mess. And at the end of last year, I had up to sort of £15,000 worth of damage across 3 of my properties. But you have to take the good with the bad. All the other
I guess
properties
you factor that in a little bit when you're,
Yeah.
when you're in that market as well. It's interesting to hear you describe student accommodation as bulletproof. That's not what I expected, really. I think, particularly you mentioned Coventry. I have an HMO there as well, and I remember speaking to somebody about investing in HMOs in Coventry, and they at the time were talking about the amount of purpose-built accommodation was getting built for students, and also I spoke to several landlords who had student accommodation for years in Coventry, who were feeling as though that they, their students were leaving and going elsewhere. I think obviously they were not as quite a high standard as you. I wonder whether the added competition from those purpose-built places and maybe a crowded market there might have affected it. It doesn't seem as though it has for yourself.
I love this question. It always amuses me.
Oh, I'm not original there. You've had this one before.
Oh, many times. And they've been talking about market saturation in Coventry for the last 10 years, 15 years. And the purpose-built accommodation is the same. Whenever a university is growing, they always build a ton of purpose-built accommodation, which doesn't in any way mean that students want to live in them. So I know there are lots of purpose-built accommodation which are sitting there empty. The bedrooms are absolutely tiny. They are more expensive than private accommodation. There's obviously lots of rules and regulations which, kids, when they just left home, they're not interested in doing that, apart from the first year. So since time began at university, the way that students live in this country is they spend the first year in halls of residence, purpose-built accommodation. So you've got your first year market there. Without a question. And then the second and third year, students always live in private accommodation with their friends. That's always been the case. That's never going to change. Overseas students, yes, sometimes they sometimes want to work towards living sort of one-bed flats. So there's a market for the flats, and you do get the odd postgrad who is happy to go back into purpose-built accommodation. But apart from that, it's not going to change. The whole way that kids live in student world in this country is the same all over the place. So it's not something that concerns me at all. The only thing that I would say would have been challenging for old landlords who've had accommodation for years is there's people like me who've come in and are actually creating really, really beautiful homes for students. So they're no longer being able to charge a lot of rent for, substandard accommodation. They've actually, they've creamed off the crop for decades, and now they've actually got to reinvest in their properties because the licensing laws have changed as well. So you do have a huge amount of empty accommodation on the lower end of properties that are not basically that they don't qualify for the licensing because of the change in fire regs and various other bits and pieces. So landlords then are offloading lots of their properties because they just don't need them anymore, and they're not prepared to reinvest in the property. So you do see a lot. There are a lot of empty properties that are just not rented because they're not fit for purpose, and people like us are coming in and buying them. So it kind of depends what market you're aiming for, but there's always a need for accommodation at the sort of the cheaper end. I'm aiming for accommodation right at the top end, which again is a very small percentage. So as long as you are very clear with who your target profile is within, in my example, in my incident, in my situation, students, I'm going for the top end. That market is very, very small. So I'm not bothered by competition at all. So I hope that kind of answers the question.
Yeah, it does. And I, from somebody on the outside, I've had the impression that certain universities maybe have had less demand, or people who have been doing online lessons, or international students who haven't been coming to the UK, and I wondered whether that had impacted you. Again, sounds like it hasn't. I mean, what's your take on that?
So There have been fewer students at the university because they haven't had maximum capacity. Most of the courses went online 100%. But the students' view was, we've paid for this accommodation, we have left home, and we want to live with our mates. So regardless of whether the university is online or actually, lectures happening face to face, the students have opted to stay at the university with their friends. Why wouldn't you? So it hasn't affected the rental market from my perspective at all. They signed the contract at a date for an 11, 12-month contract. They are tied in. So a few decided that they were just going to go home and carry on paying the rent from home. But I'd say 90 to 95% of my tenants, they stayed at the university, living with their friends because, they wanted to try and have some kind of fun and make the most of their university experience under very difficult, challenging circumstances.
Thank you so much for watching. You can catch the full episode of Where to Invest wherever you get your podcasts. And if you enjoyed this, don't forget to hit the like button and share it so it can reach more people. And tell us in the comments, what place do you want to see us talk about next? Where are you interested in investing? Well, that's all from me. I'll see you next time on Where to Invest.